Tejanos in Mexican Texas. First, I want to go over a little bit of Mexican politics during the time when Texas was a part of Mexico, from 1821 to 1836. The central conflict in Mexican politics at this time was between Centralists and Federalists. So the Centralists wanted centralized government in Mexico City, and they tended to support the traditional rights or powers of the military and the church. The Federalists wanted a decentralized government with states free to govern themselves, and they thought that members of the church and the military should have no more rights, no special rights than anyone else in Mexican society. Texas was one of many states in the Republic of Mexico that strongly supported the Federalists. When Mexico became independent from Spain in 1821, it was first ruled by Agustin Iturbide, a general who helped secure Mexico's independence and who became the emperor. He was crowned as the emperor and ruled as emperor from 1822 to 1823, when he was forced to leave, and the Constitution of 1824 was written to create a republic to govern the Mexican country. The first Mexican republic saw a series of leaders. Power changed hands rapidly and continuously over the next several years. So Guadalupe Victoria, pictured on the left, was the first constitutionally elected president of Mexico and the only president who completed his full term in almost 30 years of almost the first 30 years of Mexico's independence. Manuel Gomez Pedraza was a candidate for president of the Republic in 1828, and he defeated Vicente Guerrero and won the election. However, on December 3, 1828, under military threat, after the National Palace had been bombed by his adversaries, including Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, he renounced his victory and left the country. The election was annulled, and Guerrero was named president. Vicente Guerrero, on the right, was president in 1829. He was appointed by Congress after the resignation of President-elect Manuel Gomez Pedraza. On September 16, 1829, he announced the abolition of slavery in Mexico. He was later deposed in a rebellion under Vice President Anastasio Bustamante that began on December 4, 1829. Jose Maria Bocanegra became president when Congress appointed him interim president after Guerrero left office to fight the rebellion, led by his vice president. Anastasio Bustamante assumed the presidency in 1830 after successfully leading the coup against Guerrero. In 1832, Bustamante left office to fight another rebellion, this one led by Santa Anna. Congress appointed Melchor Musquiz an interim president in 1832 while Bustamante was away. Manuel Gomez Pedraza assumed the presidency in 1832 to conclude the term he would have won in 1829 had he not resigned prior to his inauguration as the winner of the elections of 1828. Valentin Gomez Farias became vice president when Santa Anna was elected president in 1833. He assumed the presidency when Santa Anna left Mexico City for his villa in Veracruz instead of taking office. He promoted liberal reforms that led to the discontent of conservatives, the military, and the church. So Santa Anna took office again, and Gomez Farias went into exile. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna then assumed the presidency as the constitutionally elected president. He alternated in the presidency with Vice President Gomez Farias 4 times until April 4, 1834, when he took office and Gomez Farias was sent into exile. Santa Anna then canceled the liberal reforms of Vice President Gomez Farias in 1834. In 1835, Santa Anna left office to go fight a rebellion in Zacatecas and Miguel Barragan was appointed interim president by Congress during that time. And that brings us to the situation in Texas, the state of the Texas during these years under Mexican misrule. So most Hispanic Texans, or Tejanos, lived in rural, central, and southern Texas. Others resided in the three urban settlements founded in the 18th century: San Antonio, or Béjar, Goliad, and Nacogdoches. In 1834, Béjar and outlying ranches had a Hispanic population of 2,400, Goliad had 700, and Nacogdoches about 500. Victoria, which was colonized by Martin de Leon in 1824, had 300 residents in 1834. Laredo, on the north bank of the Rio Grande, had a population of about 2,000 in 1835, and other Hispanic families lived on the ranches north of the river as far as today's Nueces County. Oligarchs occupied the upper crust of society in Mexican Texas. Their standing rested on government position, family, racial background, business, and land possession. At the bottom lived peones and day laborers, usually mixed bloods and Hispanicized Indians. Throughout the Mexican era, it was the upper class that voiced political opinions. Hispanic women lived in a society that stressed frontier ruggedness and masculinity. Mexican law permitted women numerous freedoms, such as the right to have their own property while married, and the right to judicial redress, but they nonetheless encountered numerous political and legal constraints. Women could not vote or be office holders. Following Catholic canon law, divorce in the modern sense was impossible, leaving women open to considerable spousal abuse. Under Mexican rule, the government committed itself to a program of public education, but support to communities was often inadequate. Citizens used municipal taxes and individual contributions to educate their children. Hispanic Texans established schools in each of the urban areas during the 1820s, though they functioned irregularly amid weak government support, political uncertainty, and the threat of Indian raids, epidemics, and the difficulty of finding qualified teachers. Tejanos carried on religious practices grounded on Catholic tradition, but adjusted to frontier existence. By the 1820s, the Catholic Church had almost forsaken its commitment to the far north. The two priests still assigned to Texas had interests other than spiritual. One was among the wealthiest men in Béjar, and both had questionable reputations. Dissatisfied Tejanos showed reluctance to contribute for the ministering of the sacraments. Pleading impoverishment, they claimed inability to make church donations. Nevertheless, communities continued to observe religious and secular feast days with public celebrations that included church ceremonials. Despite local, state, and national officials' efforts to make peace, raids on the Anglo and Tejano settlements remained frequent. Comanches, Apaches, and other tribes continued their custom of stealing livestock throughout the Mexican era. Some traded horses, mules, furs, and other stolen goods to unscrupulous Americans for weapons. Hispanic rancheros rounded up wild cattle and mustangs in the brush country, selling cattle in Coahuila and Louisiana. Rancheros were still harried by government restrictions and dangers from hostile Indians. Possibly, Tejanos found new markets for cattle and horses among the Anglo-Texan arrivals. Farming among the Hispanic population took a subordinate position to ranching. San Antonio residents irrigated small family-owned fields and orchards to raise a variety of vegetables, grains, and fruits, but did not produce them in exportable amounts. Wealthier landholders did cultivate produce to sell for a profit to the local military. Some landowners near San Antonio or Goliad experimented with cotton production, but their crops added up to only a small portion of the total amount of cotton harvested in the province. With hard cash practically unknown, barter was the popular way of conducting business. Transactions often involved payment with cows, swine, poultry, or even land. Money is very scarce in Texas, reported Juan Almonte in 1834, and one may say with certainty that out of every 100 transactions, maybe not 10 involve specie. By specie, he meant coin or money. Counterfeit paper money from both Mexico and the United States appeared regularly and was a constant problem. Immigration from the United States to Texas produced new political directions for the province from 1821 to 1836. Federalists generally encouraged the arrival of Anglo-Americans in the hopes of advancing and modernizing Coahuila and Texas. But Centralists feared the Americanization of Texas and consistently clashed with the Federalist policy and the fractious Anglo-Americans. Now I'd like to talk about a few interesting and notable Tejanos in Mexican Texas. Juan Jose Maria Erasmo de Jesus Seguin, better known as Erasmo Seguin, Jose Refugio Guadalupe de la Garza, Martín de León, Juan Martín de Veramendi, and Lorenzo de Zavala. Erasmo Seguin was born in San Antonio on May 26, 1782. His public career began in 1807 when he became San Antonio postmaster, a position he held until October 1835 with only 2 interruptions. He opposed the Casas Revolt, which broke out in San Antonio in January 1811, and helped lead the counter-revolt, and served on the local governing council until Royalist officers returned. Nevertheless, during the 1812-13 Gutierrez-Magee expedition, he came under suspicion of collaborating with revolutionaries. He had his property confiscated, and he was removed from office as postmaster. Unwilling to accept a pardon, he was exonerated in 1818, but did not regain his postmastership until 1822. Shortly before independence, he was elected alcalde of San Antonio, the first of a number of local offices he held during the Mexican and early Republic of Texas periods. In 1825, he received an appointment from the federal government as quartermaster for the San Antonio garrison. Seguin represented Texas in the Congress that wrote the Constitution of 1824. Austin's colony contributed several hundred bushels of corn to help pay Seguin's expenses. In 1824, Seguin worked in Mexico City to promote the interests of both his native San Antonio and the Anglo-American settlers. Seguin worked on the liberal national colonization law of August 18, 1824, which left most issues of immigration and land distribution in the hands of state governments. He reluctantly accepted the union of Coahuila and Texas, but fought for a provision allowing Texas to petition for separate statehood at a future date. Seguin also worked for a loose interpretation of the requirement that settlers be Catholic, and against the complete abolition of slavery. Upon his return to San Antonio late in 1824, Seguin labored to build up his economic position. Having recovered possession of the property confiscated during the Mexican War of Independence, which included a large ranch previously belonging to San Antonio de Valero Mission, he added to his holdings a 9,000-acre tract at a site near present Floresville. There he made an effort to become a cotton planter. Seguin also developed business and personal ties to Stephen F. Austin, who often stayed with the Seguins during his travels through the area. The Convention of 1833 appointed Seguin as one of 3 representatives to present Texas's grievances to the national government, although he declined the assignment. At the outbreak of the Texas Rebellion in October 1835, General Martín Perfecto de Cos removed Seguin from office and forced him to march to his ranch 30 miles east of San Antonio. Casablanca, as the estate was known, supplied beef, cattle, horses, mules, and corn to the Texas Army during the rebellion. In 1840, the Texas Congress compensated Seguin in the amount of $3,004 for the supplies he furnished. Seguin's interests not only suffered at the hands of the Mexican army, but at the hands of Anglo-American rustlers, who as late as 1842 made off with a sizable number of cattle from his ranch. In that same year, Thomas Jefferson Greene accused Seguin of collaborating with Mexico, a charge that found no support among other Anglo-Americans. During the 1840s and 1850s, Erasmo Seguin dedicated himself to his ranch, where he died on October 30, 1857. Refugio de la Garza, parish priest and political figure, was born in San Antonio on November 12, 1875, the second of 6 children of Mariano and Maria Josefa Flores de la Garza, both also natives of San Antonio. He left San Antonio by the age of 15, possibly to pursue his studies at a Mexican seminary. He was appointed parish priest of San Antonio in 1819 and arrived in January 1820 to begin a tenure that lasted 2 decades. His first 2 years were marked by efforts to rebuild and improve the parish church, but later he appears to have taken more interest in worldly pursuits than in spiritual matters. He was charged with poor management of the parish church and the religious lives of his parishioners. He acquired large acreage at Nuestra Señora de la Purísima Concepción de Acuña Mission and became one of Béjar's wealthiest men. He also fathered at least 3 children by 1 or more mistresses. Garza was one of the few well-educated men in the community. In January 1822, he was chosen to represent Texas at the Congress called in Mexico City to write a constitution for the new nation. While in Mexico City during 1822 and early 1823, he worked for the final secularization of the Spanish missions in Texas, the establishment of forts along the Indian frontier, a port on the Gulf Coast, and tax exemptions for the region. He also served on the colonization committee that drafted the legislation under which Stephen F. Austin established his first colony. He ran afoul of both Tejanos and newly arrived Anglo-Americans in the late 1830s. Although he served as a messenger between General Martin Perfecto de Cos and Stephen F. Austin during the siege of Béjar in October and November 1835, his worldly activities won him no friends. His continued contacts with Mexico brought him under suspicion as a traitor. In January 1839, both Juan N. Seguin and José Antonio Navarro complained of his shortcomings as a priest to Father John Tiemann, who had been sent by the Bishop of New Orleans to determine the state of the church in Texas. On August 3, 1840, John Marie Odine, Vice Prefect Apostolic of Texas, withdrew Garza's priestly faculties. That same day, Garza was sent to Austin for trial on charges of corresponding with General Mariano Arista. He was found guilty, but received only a reprimand. In September 1842, General Adrian Wool invaded Texas and occupied San Antonio. While in Béjar, he restored Garza as parish priest. The appointment proved short-lived as Wool's retreat within a few days nullified his actions. Garza left San Antonio with Wool and was named chaplain of the Presidial Company of the Rio Grande, a post he held until his death in 1845 or 1846. Martín de León, the only Mexican impresario to found a colony in Texas, was born in 1765 in Burgos, Nuevo Santander, now Tamaulipas, where his parents, Bernardo and Maria Galván de León, settled after moving from Burgos, Spain. The de Leóns were an aristocratic family of great wealth. Members were educated in Madrid, Paris, and London, and were acquainted with European rulers. Martín, however, declined his father's offer to complete his education in Monterrey in Europe, choosing instead to become a merchant and supplier of provisions to the miners of Real de San Nicolás. In 1790, he joined the Fieles de Burgos regiment, organized by Mexican Viceroy Juan Vicente Guernes Pacheco as a defense against Indians in Nuevo Santander. De León was promoted to captain, thus achieving the highest rank available to a criollo. A criollo was a Spaniard or a person of Spanish blood born in the New World, in Mexico in this case. In 1795, De Leon married Patricia de la Garza, daughter of General Felipe de la Garza, commandant of the eastern internal provinces. The couple settled in Cruillas, Nuevo Santander, now Tamaulipas, where they began ranching. An excursion to La Bahia, San Antonio, and Nacogdoches in 1805 induced De Leon to settle in Texas. He established a ranch between Chiltepin Creek and the Aransas River, stocked it with cattle, horses, mules, and goats that he brought from Mexico, and enclosed several leagues of land with a brush fence in an effort to corral and domesticate mustangs. In 1807, De Leon petitioned the Spanish governor at San Antonio, Manuel Maria de Salcedo, to establish a colony in this vicinity. The government, however, denied this request, as well as a second one in 1809, as a result of rising political troubles in Mexico and rumors that the De Leons were not loyal to Spain. De Leon then established a new ranch on the east bank of the Nueces River, near the site of present San Patricio, where he enclosed another pasture. He had by this time driven several herds of livestock to market at New Orleans, thus becoming one of the earliest trail drivers in Texas. Texas Presidio garrisons were moved as a result of the uprising in September 1810 of Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. Because the frontier then became vulnerable to hostile Lipans and Comanches, De Leon removed his family to the safety of San Antonio, where he joined the Republicans in resisting the Royalists under Joaquin de Arredondo and Ignacio Elizondo. After a respite in Burgos in 1816, De Leon returned to his ranch and cattle, now numbering about 5,000 head. In 1823, he drove a large herd of livestock to New Orleans and became interested in settling a colony on the lower Guadalupe River. Mexican independence from Spain brought a more open colonization policy. On April 8, 1824, De Leon petitioned the provincial delegation at San Fernando de Bejar to settle 41 Mexican families on the lower Guadalupe, and founded the town of Nuestra Señora Guadalupe de Jesus Victoria. The colonization grant was approved on April 13. De Leon's colony was the only predominantly Mexican colony in Texas, and as a Mexican citizen, the impresario received legal preference in the numerous border disputes with American settlements encircling Guadalupe Victoria. De Leon stood 6 feet tall and was skilled as a horseman and Indian fighter. Indians called him Capitan Vacas Muchas, Captain Plenty of Cows, since he often placated raiding parties by feeding them beef. His 5-league, 22,140-acre ranch was located on Garcitas Creek in what is now southeastern Victoria County, and probably included the site of LaSalle's Fort St. Louis. His thousands of cattle carried the first brand in Texas, and E and J connected, signifying Espiritu de Jesus. De Leon registered the historic brand in 1807. Jesuits had used it for hundreds of years before the royal De Leon family in Spain adopted it. As a devout Catholic, De Leon was planning to build a church without rival in Texas when he became a victim of the cholera epidemic of 1833 and died, leaving his widow, 4 sons, and 6 daughters an estate of over $500,000. In addition to dominating Guadalupe Victoria, the family of Martín de Leon controlled the Ayuntamiento of Goliad. Sons-in-law José Miguel Aldrete and Rafael Manchola each served as alcalde, and Manchola was also commandant of the La Bahia garrison. The family was intimately involved with the Texas cause against Antonio López de Santa Anna as well. General José Carbajal and Captain Plácido Benavides were sons-in-laws of De Leon. Martín's sons Fernando, Silvestre, Felix, and Agapito de Leon contributed horses, mules, cattle, military equipment and provisions to the Texas Army, and offered the safety of their ranches to colonists needing refuge. In addition, Patricia de Leon contributed $9,800 and cows, horses, and mules valued at $300, which she inherited from her father. Not surprisingly, the Mexican Army of Occupation, under General Jose de Urrea, singled out the de Leon family as traitors. Fernando and Silvestre were arrested. After the Texas victory at San Jacinto, the de Leons fell victim to the prejudice directed against Texans of Mexican descent. The de Leon, Benavides, and Carbajal families were forced to abandon their lands, cattle, and most possessions and flee to Louisiana for their lives. The de Leons remained in New Orleans for about 3 years before removing to Soto La Marina, now in Tamaulipas, the childhood home of Patricia de la Garza de Leon, where her daughter, Augustina de Leon Benavides, died in 1841. Soon thereafter, Patricia and her family returned to Texas to recover their property, but they were largely unsuccessful. In April 1972, descendants of the de Leons were honored with Texas State Historical Markers in Evergreen Cemetery, Victoria. Among those attending the dedication were Patricia de Leon, great-granddaughter of the impresario, and Dr. Ricardo Victoria of Mexico, great-grandson of President Guadalupe Victoria, for whom Victoria, Texas, is named. Juan Martín del Carmen de Veramendi was born in San Fernando de Bejar, San Antonio, on December 17, 1778, the son of Spaniard Fernando and Canary Islands descendant Maria Josefa Granados. He married Josefa Navarro. They became the parents of 7 children. Veramendi entered public life at the turn of the 19th century, following his father into mercantile activities and public service. His first public service was as Sindico Procurador, municipal attorney, in 1808. Along with his merchant business, he also owned farmland and operated a stock ranch on the eve of the Mexican War of Independence. Although he sided with Juan Manuel Zambrano and the Loyalist group that overthrew Juan Bautista de las Casas in March 1811, he subsequently became associated with the insurgent side during the Gutierrez Magui expedition, although he apparently spent most of the period in Louisiana. He gained the confidence of Commandant General Joaquin de Arredondo, and in spring 1814 returned to San Antonio with orders for the return of his property, which had been confiscated by the Royalists when they recovered San Antonio following the Battle of Medina. Veramendi soon resumed his commercial activities, including flirting with contraband trade across the border in Louisiana. He also resumed public service on the city council beginning in 1820. Veramendi and Erasmo Seguin met Stephen F. Austin at Natchitoches, Louisiana on June 21, 1821, and accompanied him to Bejar. In 1823, Veramendi obtained a grant of 5 leagues of land from the Ayuntamiento. When he discovered that the land lay within Green DeWitt's colony, he petitioned for a grant under the colonization law of March 24, 1825, so that he would not be classified as a colonist of the impresario DeWitt. After he renewed his petition for land around 1827, he received a grant of 11 leagues. Veramendi was first alcalde of Bejar in 1824 and 1825, and in 1827 was elected an alternate deputy to the state legislature. He was elected vice governor of Coahuila in Texas on September 6, 1830, and was confirmed by the legislature on January 4, 1831, but remained in Texas to continue his commercial activities. That same year, his daughter Ursula Maria married James Bowie. When Governor Jose Maria Letona died less than 2 years into his term of office, Veramendi was called to Saltillo to serve on an interim capacity. He and his family arrived at the end of 1832, a period of rising political tensions. During his term, an anti-Saltillo group of legislators from Texas, Parras, and Monclova managed to pass legislation moving the state capital from Saltillo to Monclova. After the transfer, Garamendi's efforts increasingly turned to the growing cholera epidemic sweeping through the state. Juan Martín del Carmen de Garamendi, his wife Josefa, and daughter Ursula all succumbed to the disease in September 1833. News of his death on September 7, arrived in San Antonio 3 weeks later, where he left an estate of over 30,000 acres to his remaining children. Lorenzo de Zavala. Manuel Lorenzo Justiniano de Zavala y Sáenz, first Vice President of the Republic of Texas, the fifth of 9 children, was born in the village of Teco near Mérida, Yucatan, on October 3, 1788. He is best known as an author of a 2-volume history of Mexico, which first appeared under the title Ensayo Histórico de las Revoluciones de México desde 1808 hasta 1830, Historical Essay on the Revolutions in Mexico from 1808 until 1830, and for his Viaje a los Estados Unidos del Norte de América, Voyage or Journey to the United States of North America, in which he described economic, political, and social phenomena he observed during his visit to the United States in 1830 and 1831. Lorenzo de Zavala graduated from the Tridentine Seminary of San Ildefonso in Mérida in 1807. In the 25 years after 1807, when Zavala became politically active, he demonstrated his skills as a writer in uncounted articles and editorials in newspapers in Mérida and Mexico City, and in a large number of pamphlets and memorials. He founded and edited several newspapers in which he expressed democratic ideas. He was the secretary of the City Council of Mérida from 1812 until 1814. His support for democratic reforms led to his imprisonment in 1814 in the fortress of San Juan de Ulloa in the harbor of Veracruz, where he gained enough knowledge from reading medical textbooks to qualify him to practice medicine upon his relief from prison in 1817. He also taught himself to read English during his imprisonment. After serving as secretary of the Provincial Assembly of Yucatan in 1820, Zavala went to Madrid in 1821 as a deputy to the Spanish Cortes. Upon his return to Mexico, he joined the leaders of the new nation in establishing a republican government. From 1822 until his death, he was one of the nation's most active political leaders, representing Yucatan as a deputy in the First and Second Mexican Constituent Congresses of 1822 and 1824, and in the Mexican Senate from 1824 to 1826. When Vicente Ramon Guerrero became president, Zavala was appointed Secretary of the Treasury and served from April to October 1829. When the Centralist Party, led by Vice President Anastasio Bustamante, ousted Guerrero late in the year, Zavala, a strong Federalist, was forced to abandon politics, and after a period of house arrest, to go into exile in June 1830. In New York City, Zavala sought to interest Eastern capitalists in impresario grants he had received in 1829, which authorized him to settle 500 families in a huge tract of land in what is now southeastern Texas. In October 1830, he transferred his interest in the grants to the Galveston Bay and Texas Land Company. After spending several months during 1831 in France and England, Zavala resided in New York City until his return to Mexico in the summer of 1832. From December 1832 until October 1833, he served as governor of the state of Mexico, before returning to the Congress as a deputy for his native state of Yucatan. Named by President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna in October 1833 to serve as the first minister plenipotentiary of the Mexican legation in Paris, France, he reported to that post in the spring of 1834. When he learned that Santa Anna had assumed dictatorial powers in April of that year, Zavala denounced his former ally and resigned from his diplomatic assignment. Disregarding Santa Anna's orders to return to Mexico City, he traveled to New York and then to Texas, where he arrived in July 1835. From the day of his arrival, he was drawn into the political cauldron of Texas politics. Although he first advocated the cause of Mexican federalism, within a few weeks he became an active supporter of the independence movement. He served in the Permanent Council and later as the representative of Harrisburg in the Consultation and the Convention of 1836. At the convention, Zavala signed the Texas Declaration of Independence, along with Jose Francisco Ruiz, Jose Antonio Navarro, and 56 other delegates. Zavala's legislative, executive, ministerial, and diplomatic experience, together with his education and linguistic ability, uniquely qualified him for the role he was to play in the drafting of the Constitution of the Republic of Texas. His advice and counsel earned him the respect of his fellow delegates, who elected him ad interim vice president of the new republic. In the weeks after adjournment of the convention, Zavala rejoined his family at their home at Zavala Point in Buffalo Bayou, from where they fled to Galveston Island as Santa Anna's army pursued Zavala and other cabinet members across Texas. Zavala returned to his home in poor health and relinquished his part in the affairs of state. He resigned the vice presidency in October 1836. Less than a month later, soaked and half frozen after his rowboat overturned in Buffalo Bayou, he developed pneumonia, to which he succumbed on November 15, 1836. Zavala's first wife was Teresa Correa y Correa, whom he married in Yucatan in 1807. They had 3 children, including Lorenzo Jr., who served his father in Paris as Secretary of Legation, and after the Battle of San Jacinto, served as translator for Sam Houston in his negotiations with Santa Anna. Zavala's wife died in the spring of 1831, and he married Emily West, a native of New York, in New York City on November 12, 1831. To this union were born 3 children. Augustine, the eldest, was the father of Adina Emilia de Zavala, who is remembered for her spirited role in the fight to preserve the Alamo.